Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Marshall, and I'm the manager of exhibitions and programs at the George Eastman Museum. Welcome to today's In Focus virtual talk with project cataloger Lily Jones and project photographer Mireya Salinas, who will be giving us a behind-the-scenes look at their work digitizing and cataloging the Alden Scott Boyer collection at George Eastman Museum. For those of you who aren't familiar, our In Focus series gives the public and our members a glimpse into projects that often go on behind closed doors at the museum. So it's a really unique opportunity to look at some of the research or a lot of the stuff that just kind of goes unseen to the general public. And this is a great way for us to bring that to you. Our next talk is with Clara Auclair on April 9th. And Clara will be discussing her work researching the Francis Dublier collection at the museum. If you have questions throughout today's talk, please submit them through the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. That might be at the top of your screen. It kind of depends on where you're logging in from. The chat function is open, but we will not be monitoring it for questions. If you want to stop and use the chat and say hello, let us know where you're tuning in from, that's great. But any questions, please submit them through the Q&A function. At the end of Mireya and Lily's talk, we'll go through as many questions as we have time for. We are recording today's webinar and we'll be putting it on our YouTube channel in the coming week. So if you'd like to go back and watch again or share with others, you'll be able to access it along with our other webinars and video content through YouTube. We have closed captioning function. Oh, I haven't turned that on yet. I will do that right now. This is a good reminder to myself. So I am turning on the closed captioning function. And this is a function that is offered through Zoom. And if you would like to turn it off, there should be a CC icon on your program that will allow you to disable it. I do want to note that while it's a great feature for us to be able to use, there are some difficulties with some of the technical language that's really specific to photography that the program has a difficult time interpreting. So you may see some inconsistencies in language there, but it is great that that function exists and we're able to use it. With that, I will turn it over to Lily, who I believe is going to kick things off for us. So go ahead, Lily.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Lilyan Jones, and I am the Alden Scott Boyer Project Cataloger.
And my name is Mireya Salinas, and I'm the Alden Scott Boyer Collection Project Photographer. Our project, Preserving and Improving Access to the Boyer Collection, has been made possible in part by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Democracy demands wisdom.
So, the man, the myth, the legend, Alden Scott Boyer. He was a Chicago-based chemist who was the president of the Boyer Chemical Laboratory Company that produced various chemical products, perfume, and cosmetics. And if he was alive today, he would have definitely been on an episode of American Pickers. He was an avid collector of photographs and things related to photography, like pamphlets, books, and cameras. But he also collected coins, bicycles, slot machines, coin-operated machines, player pianos, a little bit of everything. And he was even just this year posthumously inducted into the Chicago Coin Club Hall of Fame. And for a time, he even ran his own museum, the Boyer Museum of American Curiosities, which was located in a former bank building, so he even had a vault for his treasures. He was known for his dogged pursuit of whatever it was he was collecting at the time, and he would put ads in newspapers listing what he was looking for, and he had a whole network of correspondents he shared leads with. And one of his correspondents was Beaumont Newhall. And Beaumont Newhall is known for his book, The History of Photography, and was the first curator of photography and later the second ever director of the George Eastman Museum, then known as the George Eastman House. And here you can see the inscription he made to Boyer in Boyer's personal copy of the History of Photography, which we have here in the library. And it says, "Alden, at last, you'll recognize many a cull and a pluck, for which deep thanks, Beaumont." And Boyer actively helped Newhall's collecting efforts for the museum, just as Newhall helped his. And here you can see some of the notes Boyer made in his copy of the History of Photography. And he loved to write little notes on things and keep an eye out for more of his handwriting and some of the objects we'll be talking about later. These notes are a part checklist of what he already had, like under this photograph of Maxime de Camp, it says, "I have this series of 128 prints." And it was also part shopping list of what he wanted to get. This note says, "Do I have this?" But by 1950, he decided he was kind of done collecting photography and things related to it. So the story goes, Boyer rings Newhall at the museum and says, "Do you want to buy it, or do you want me to give it to you?" And obviously, the museum said, "You can just give it to us." And unfortunately, he passed not many years later in 1953. And his wife Elizabeth gave us even more of his collection that had not been included in the 1950 gift. And that is how the over 10,000 objects in Boyer's collection came to the George Eastman. His collection is one of what we call the Big Three, referring to the three foundational collections that make up the photography collection, the other two being the Cromer collection and the Sipley collection. As for what is in the Boyer collection, Boyer was primarily focused on collecting works from the 19th century. And this includes many important early photographic works, such as Hill and Adamson salt prints, Southworth and Hawes daguerreotypes, works by Julia Margaret Cameron. There are a lot of very important early photographers. And the collection also goes beyond photographs, and it includes books and albums, early pamphlets on photography, cameras. He would buy the entire contents of photography studios. He also gave correspondence, both his own letters and letters between noted early photographers. He had multiple copies of many works. The collection has 2 copies of William Henry Fox Talbot's The Pencil of Nature, which was the first published photo book from the 1840s. And all told, the initial 1950 gift from Boyer was 4.5 tons of material. So, how do we tackle processing this huge, fabulous, important collection? We kind of have to do it one object at a time. On my side of the project, I'm the cataloger. So I am in charge of gathering, organizing, and entering all the information I can get from the objects into the museum's database. And we use a collection management system called the Museum System, or TMS, and I'll probably be referring to it as TMS. And these are my basic everyday tools. Thank you, Mireya, for the lovely photo. Here I have a pocket microscope, a magnifying glass, a loop, a measuring tape, and nitrile gloves. And I know museum staff are sometimes characterized as using white gloves, but when working with photographs, those white cotton gloves are more likely to snag on the objects, which is why we use the much smoother nitrile gloves. And so for flat objects, I will remove it from its box, examine it inside of its housing, which could be a mat or a sleeve. Or if it's a book, I'm looking at the cover and the spine, and I'm looking at the condition, if there's any certain way I should be handling it. I'm looking for inscriptions or writing on the object, especially Boyer's handwriting. And then I look at the photograph itself. And part of my job is determining the process that was used to create the photograph. And I do this by looking at the color, the tone, the fading, and I also use my handy pocket microscope to get a super close-up look to see if I can see things like paper fibers. And their presence or absence will also give me clues as to what process was used. And there's not just one way to make a photograph, and determining process ID can help me to date the photograph. as different photographic processes were popular at different times, and they were also invented at different times. Then finally, I measure the object and begin to enter all the information into our database TMX. And I do all of this in accordance with our cataloging manual, which keeps how information is entered into the database consistent. And these next slides are to show an object record that has not been cataloged and digitized, and an object record that has been cataloged and digitized. So this also gives you an idea of what TMS looks like and what I'm looking at pretty much all day, every day. So this first record is kind of sad. There's barely any information in there, and it doesn't even have one of Mireya's beautiful photos. And this is a record after it has been cataloged and digitized. There's a lot more information in there, and you can even see a photo of the object so you know what it looks like.
All right, and on my side of the project, I'm the photographer. I'm responsible for creating the high-resolution, true-to-life, digital reproductions of the analog objects in the Boyer collection. In creating these images, I'm also serving to preserve them in their current state. These images are less vulnerable than the actual objects and are more easily available to researchers, scholars, and anyone interested in viewing the collection, like you guys. So how do I make these images? Well, it starts with the studio and some really nice equipment. I wanted to share with you all what the studio space that I work in looks like. This is a setup that I use most of the time for digitizing objects. It consists of the copy stand with a manual column. This copy stand measures approximately 30 by 32 inches and provides enough room for me to digitize a medium-sized book or album once it's opened. I have a pair of continuous lights, a Mac Pro computer, Capture 120 software for processing and digital asset management, my trusty rocket blower, a metal spatula, and nitrile gloves. The star of this setup is the camera. The Digital Transitions R-Cam reprographic camera is an industry standard in the digitization industry. It ensures focal plane alignment, an incredibly accurate focusing system, a barrel lock to prevent any accidental changes. It's incredibly durable and precise. To go with this camera is the Schneider Kreuznach, the 72mm f/5.6 lens. It has an electronic shutter that you'll be able to hear later on in this presentation, and high precision optics that provide for ultra sharp images. Finally, I have the Phase 1 IQ 180 digital back. This digital back produces 80 megapixel images. These are incredibly large files, sometimes around 500 megabytes. And if I were to print one of these at full resolution, I'd have a print that's easily 34 inches on the longest side, with clear and precise details not visible to the naked eye or with any other camera system. Those paper fibers that Lily just mentioned, I'm able to see those. It's also quite heavy duty, meant for long hours of digitizing, and this is exactly why it's used for cultural heritage. Altogether, this entire setup is a beast for digitization. So what do I do every single time? There are so many objects, and digitizing them is really an object-by-object basis. How Lily catalogs the objects helps in determining how I'm going to approach the objects. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. These objects are all also in varying conditions. When I receive an object, I inspect it to determine its fragility. For example, not all books or albums are bound, nor can they all lay open flat. I have to start asking myself questions like, how far can this book open? How much can I really handle this object? Am I going to potentially need another person to assist me as a second pair of hands? And how am I going to plan these cradles, and what accessories do I need in order to digitize the object? I want to make sure that I handle the object and digitize it in the best way possible. For 2D objects, I look at the recto, or the front side of the object, and the verso, or the back side of the object. For books and albums, the recto is the right side of the right page of the spread, and the verso is the left page of the spread. I look for several things. The first is the accession number on the verso of a print, or somewhere in the front matter of a book or album. I make sure that the accession number matches the catalog record in the museum system, also known as TMS. This accession number is also known as a type of museum hand. Museum hand is written in pencil on the verso of the object by museum staff. What I'm looking for then is anything that's not museum hand. For example, handwriting from the subject, stamps, text, newspaper clippings, drawings, or in the case of this particular collection, notes from Boyer himself. These are the things I want to digitize in addition to the images. Not all objects will require more than one image capture. The thing about the digitization process is consistency and preciseness. For the most part, the objects in the Boyer collection are grouped together by type, so their measurements and their substrates are pretty similar. Any object that's digitized must be able to be, at a minimum, reproduced on a 1-to-1 scale. The best way to do that is to frame up one of the objects. But before I do that, I have to clean off my copy stand with my rocket blower. Okay, so back to framing. I'm ensuring that I fill the frame as much as possible with both the object and the color target. Each object must have a color target in the capture, and also I'll explain why here in a minute, because it's an important part of the process. I adjust the lights, either back and or up, to minimize shadows as much as possible. I set the focus on my lens and I lock it in. I clean off my copy stand with my rocket blower, and then here comes that important part. Part of the process of producing a true-to-life image capture of an object is in the color management. I have to control the colors. In order to be able to accurately represent the colors of an object for digital capture so that they can be used later on for our databases, for viewing on your laptops, cell phones, and for printing, etc., I need a color target. This here is a golden thread color target. They come in various sizes. I like to use the smallest one, as it most often takes up the least amount of real estate when framing the object. With this, I can determine proper exposure, I can set my white balance from it, I get colors that can be checked based off of lab numbers, and because of the rulers, I also provide a sense of scale for the object. When these images are passed off to others, they can also replicate the image with color accuracy because of this color target that's been included in the image. Now, I also have to make what's called an LCC profile. LCC stands for Lens Cast Calibration. An LCC profile corrects light fall off, which means that it helps to even out my lighting, and it corrects any color cast. I create my profile by capturing an image of a translucent tile, and I will apply this profile to all of my images going forward. Once all of this is done, nothing in my setup should have to change. The less I have to move the camera on the copy stand, the better. Then I clean off the copy stand with my rocket blower. And then I can finally begin digitizing. Any image that I capture is considered a master file. From these, I produce derivatives, such as TIFFs and JPEGs of every object, after which, when I'm done with them on my end, they're sent to our rights and reproduction manager, who makes the images available on the museum system, Cumulus, and eMuseum. The images captured here at the George Eastman Museum are guided by the federal agency's Digital Guidelines Initiative, known simply as FADGI. If you're interested in these guidelines, they're available at digitizationguidelines.gov.
Now we're going to go into some types of objects we've worked on from the collection. And if anyone is interested in any of the objects or wants to see more work by the photographers, the George Eastman Museum's collections are available online. And you can go to the website, eastman.org, click on the Collections tab, and then scroll down to Collections Online, or you can type in eastman.org/collections-online. Accessibility is one of the main goals of our project, and one of the ways we can achieve that is by getting this information online. And I came onto this project a couple of months before Mireya, and this was to create a backlog of objects for her to work on. Some things require me to catalog them first, so she knows how to digitize them. And one of those things that I did first was books and albums, which sometimes need to be broken out. And broken out refers to how when I catalog, I am not just making one record for one book, but I am also making individual records to record each photograph in the book as well. As you can see in the caption of this book by Maxime Ducamp, its accession number is 1976-0110-0001-0128. Our accession numbers currently use a three-part numbering system. The first part, 1976, refers to the year it was accessioned, brought into the museum collection, or in this case, it's actually the year it was renumbered to meet the current numbering system. The next number, 0110, is a lot number, and the final number, 0001-0128, refers to a specific thing in that lot. And that number refers to the overall book, but if we're talking about, say, the 38th photograph in the book, its accession number would be 1976-0110-0038. And the reason for a lot of zeros is just how the database works. So it's kind of like a computer thing. So here, each individual photograph in the book has been broken out of a single book record to better provide information on the photographs that are contained in that book. And whether or not something is broken out is kind of determined on a case-by-case basis. So we chose two books to show as examples, one by Maxime Ducamp, who was a French photographer who studied under Gustave Legray, and he was active in the mid-1800s. This particular book, Egypt, Nubia, Palestine, and Syria, is from 1852 and is bound, meaning that it is like a typical book. The pages are attached by a spine between two covers. And a fun little thing I love about this work is that Ducamp used one of his guides to show scale in his photos. So if you're ever looking through it online, or if you're lucky enough to look through it in person, it's like a little Where's Waldo. And the other book we chose is by Francis Frith, who was an English photographer, also active in the mid-1800s, though a little later than Ducamp. This book, Lower Egypt, Thebes, and the Pyramids, is from 1862 and is unbound. Unbound in this case, meaning it is free from the spine and cover and is now basically a stack of loose pages. And this is something that can happen from deterioration over time. The glue book binding the book can fail, the spine can disintegrate, and you're left with an unbound book. And for me, from a cataloging perspective, these were fairly simple. They're both well documented, published works, so it's just a matter of going through and making sure everything had a record, was measured, and all the information was correct and consistent.
So the Ducamp album was the first object I digitized for this project. This is a great example of a perfectly bound album. Both covers exist, the spine is intact, and what I had to do was set up a cradle with book foams to set the album on safely. With books and albums, as Lily mentioned, the way she catalogs them determines how I digitize the plates. Either the album will have only spreads digitized or spreads and individual pages. This particular album has a record that's broken out and required that I digitize both the spreads and the individual plates. So remember how I said that nothing in my setup should have to change? Well, when it comes to albums, like this one, the thing that changes the most frequently is the focus. As I'm moving along through the album, digitizing away, I have to constantly check and reset my focus for sharpness, even if it's ever so slightly. That's because the distance between my object and the lens is actually changing. With an object like this one that had 128 plates, I found that about every 11 pages or so, I needed to reset my focus. The focus always needs to be on the image itself. So with albums, the other thing I try to do is I try to digitize them in a way to give you the experience of viewing the album as if it was in front of you and you're flipping the pages. Additionally, I digitize the front and back cover and the spine as well. Digitizing the spine is the last image I capture because it requires that I set up a different cradle, and it's also because I have to move the camera again. Because of the number of plates and the way this album was cataloged, I ended up producing a total of 271 TIFF files and 400 JPEGs. That's a lot to look through. But then I'll have albums that are completely unbound, such as with this Francis Frith, Lower Egypt, Thebes, and the Pyramids. This particular album had no covers or spine, and it was digitized as single plates. At 37 plates, I produced 39 TIFFs and 77 JPEGs.
So next we have Salted Paper Prints by Scottish photographers David Octavius Hill and Robert Adamson. And their partnership lasted from 1843 until Adamson's death in January of 1848. And they were active very early in the history of photography and fairly prolific. They did a lot of early portraiture. And for me, cataloging these, a lot of the process was identifying the sitters. And the online collection of the National Gallery Scotland was indispensable to me, as they have a large, well-researched collection of Hill and Adamson works. So I was able to match some of our photographs to theirs to determine who was in the photograph. Online collections are really great resources. And identifying sitters also occasionally helped me narrow down the date, as some of the sitters have death dates before the end of the Hill and Adamson partnership. And you may notice this portrait of Lady Eastlake is listed as a museum accession. But you also may notice that the handwriting on it looks familiar. So museum accession means that we know it belongs to the museum, but we don't know the specific credit line that would tell us how it got here. And Alden Scott Boyer gave his gift to the museum in 1950, which was 70 years ago. And in all that time, information gets lost or confused. We're human, we make errors, and some objects Boyer gave have been dissociated from him. That's why it's important we look for things like Boyer's handwriting on objects, so we are able to reassociate with them with the rest of the Boyer collection.
These objects were easy to digitize. They were handled as flat art, so just 2D objects, and when objects like these are mounted or matted, I like to capture both the print and the matte. Again, this has more to do with how you'd experience the object if you came to our study center and had these in front of you. Really, the most remarkable thing about these prints here were Boyer's notes that gave us insight into who he felt was important to the field of photography, when he purchased the particular object, how much he paid for it, and also his sense of humor. He notes here, "This has measles." This one gave me a good laugh, and it's one that's highly memorable for me. But for the record, Boyer, those aren't measles. That's called foxing.
So next we have paper negatives or calotype negatives and also some positives. These were taken by John Shaw Smith. Smith was an Irish photographer who documented his grand tour trip in the 1850s to Italy, Greece, Turkey, Egypt, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Malta, and Switzerland. It was a very grand tour. And we have a rather large collection of his work, almost 400 objects. And these were fairly easy for me to catalog, and that's because many of them have inscriptions on the verso or back, detailing where they were taken, little facts or anecdotes about the places, and sometimes even the exact day and year they were taken. So all I had to do was decipher the handwriting and confirm the place names. And you might notice that this photograph doesn't look like the other ones, and that is because it is a gelatin silver print done at a later date. This is where being able to make a process ID is important, as this sort of gelatin silver print was not common until the 1900s. So while we know this is John Shaw Smith's image, it was printed later and not by him because he died in 1873.
So the John Shaw Smith portion of the Boyer collection contains several boxes worth of paper negatives and positives. Both the paper negatives and the positives were digitized using the reflective lighting setup. So what exactly is reflective lighting? Well, simply put, it's the light that's reflected off an object. Regardless of the number of lights or whether you're lighting for texture, any light that's able to reflect off of an object is reflective lighting. As you can see here, I have the pair of lights and they're set to create uniform, even lighting. This is a setup I use most often in my digitization workflow. However, the negatives had a tendency to curl as soon as they were taken out of their sleeves, making capture difficult. This was the first instance in the project where I had to utilize a sheet of glass as part of my capture process. I wanted the negative to be as flat as possible without damaging any of the wax, so I used spacers underneath the corners of the sheet of glass to keep pressure off of the negative. Now I had the additional task of ensuring that my glass was also incredibly clean. And in order to prevent seeing the camera and the reflection of the sheet of glass during all of this, I also had to cover up my camera with a board that had a hole cut into it so that only the lens was able to fit through. After I digitized all of the John Shaw Smith paper negatives and positives with the reflective lighting setup, I had to set up my light box and go back through the boxes to digitize just the paper negatives using transmissive light. Why? Because reflective objects can also be translucent, and these negatives are no exception. Transmissive light capture is digital imaging of an object where light is transmitted through the said object. This is for objects that are intended to be viewed or used in a manner that allows light to pass through from one side of the object to the other. This is now another instance when I have to change my digitization setup. I have to go back through and reset the height of my camera, adjust my focus, clean my copy stand with the rocket blower, all the things I did to set up for reflective lighting. I'm doing this again, but I'm bringing in the light box as my light source and turning off the continuous lights. This also requires that I change out my color target for the Stouffer 21-step transparent guide so I can color manage. Like it says in the name, it's a transparent guide because you didn't think I was still going to use the golden thread color target, right? Anyways, I get to work. Again, the negatives curled and required that I use the same sheet of glass as before to help flatten them out. Using the sheet of glass for the negatives certainly added time to my workflow. Luckily, most of the objects in the Boyer collection are reflective objects, so the light box itself doesn't come out too much, and the sheet of glass comes out even less.
And these pieces are by Robert Shriver. He was an American banker with an interest in photography from Cumberland, Maryland. He was active from the 1860s until the 1900s. Many of his works are albumen silver prints. And I chose these because they were fun for me to work on. I learned a lot about the history of Maryland and West Virginia, and I found my favorite website. And so this is a little look into my research process. When I look at a photo that has no inscriptions or labels, I try to determine what it is, where it is, and when it was taken. And one of the ways I did this for this photo is by researching tunnels in the area that Shriver was known to work, in this case, Maryland and West Virginia. As I mentioned, this made me find my favorite website, and that is bridgehunter.com. It's an aggregate community source website for historic bridges, tunnels, etc. And you can search by state and even county to see what bridges are there. Cataloging in the age of the internet is kind of a gift because you have all these little websites and resources at your disposal as long as you can find them. And luckily, this is a fairly well-known canal tunnel for the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal Company. It opened in 1850 and operated until the 1920s, and it's called the Paw Paw Tunnel. And you can see here that there's a donkey pulling the canal boat along. Unfortunately, you can't see the name of the boat, which could also potentially help me fill in any blanks. I also used tools like Google Maps to determine which end of the tunnel it was. And even with all that research, I was still only able to give it a circa date, which is typically a range of 10 years. I kind of concluded, based also off of his other photographs, that this is probably circa 1865, which means it was made between 1860 and 1870. So it goes for researching these objects. You might also notice that there are two images that are basically the same but with the domed top, it means that it was probably a stereo card that was cut in half. But if you want to see a stereo card that is whole, we're going to go to the next slide.
So now we've come to the part of the collection that I had started to digitize before Lily had a chance to catalog. This is a case where I'm able to digitize the objects because they have accession numbers, and Lily is actually able to catalog from the images without necessarily having to have the objects in front of her. Part of this collection also involved digitizing the French tissue Stereoviews. You can see what that process entailed in this video. So if you've seen this video circulating on social media lately, please bear with us. But for those who haven't seen it yet, please enjoy. My name is Mireya Salinas, and I'm the Alden Scott Boyer Collection Project Photographer. Every morning, I pick up my objects from the study center and bring them into the studio. I get my space ready by turning on the lights, adjusting them as necessary, and making my workspace comfortable. Before I handle any object, I gotta put those gloves on. Object safety first. Here, I'm digitizing French tissue Stereoviews. I carefully remove the stereo view from its sleeve, and using my trusty rocket blower, dust it off, dust off the copy stand, and dust off the object once more. Then I make sure it's level in the frame. When everything looks good in the live view, I capture an image using e-shutter control on the computer, because I'm fancy that way. I inspect the captured image at 100% for focus and dust particles. And sometimes I find cool stuff like I did here. In this case, I was able to see pin-sized holes in the subject's brooch and ears. I repeat the process of digitizing the verso or backside of the stereo view. So I just digitized this stereo view using a reflective lighting setup. Next, I'll digitize this same object using transmitted light. This setup calls for a light box. I really love that sound. Those are happy beeps. Now that the object is backlit, we can see the beautiful hand coloring that was applied. As you can see, the process for capturing an image with transmitted light is pretty much the same as with reflective lighting. This object's done. On to the next. So I have for you here the final images of the French tissue stereo view that was being digitized in the video.
So what are we working on now? As Mireya said, I am working on the stereo views she digitized, and the Boyer collection has between 1,500 and 2,000 stereos. And since they've already been digitized, it's been a good pandemic project for me because I can work on them from home. I am also working on the Southworth and Haas daguerreotypes. I am identifying sitters because Boyer also collected their sitters book, which was a record of the people who posed for them. but these books are very, very large. They had a lot of clients, and they are also handwritten. To date, I have cataloged around 3,000 objects.
So what am I working on now? I'm currently working on digitizing the carte de visites portion of the collection. There's approximately 600 carte de visites, and they have also not yet been cataloged, so they'll be, ready and waiting for you, Lily. Um, and I just wanted to give you guys an update that just this past Tuesday, one of those carte de visite that I digitized became the 3,000th object that I digitized for this project. So to date, I have produced 6,713 TIFFs and 10,641 JPEGs. So what's next? Lily mentioned Boyer had 2 copies of the Pencil of Nature, and we are excited to announce that we will be cataloging and digitizing the 2 copies of the Pencil of Nature. We've already started planning out this process, and we'll also have a video for you guys, but you guys got to stay tuned in for that.
And lastly, we would like to once again thank and mention the NEH. Our project, Preserving and Improving Access to the Boyer Collection, has been made possible in part by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Democracy Demands Wisdom. Questions?
Wow, thank you both. That was really awesome. Let's just dive into some questions. Lily, the first question came in for you, and that was, have there been any surprising or funny notes that you found in the books?
Oh, there are a ton of Boyer, especially. He liked to make little notations. You definitely knew if he liked something or disliked something. And he even has a lot of little facts. On the Lady Eastlake one, the caption is about how she wrote a article that was a defense of photography in the 1840s.
The next question that came in, I believe, is for Mireya. Yes. Well, first they said excellent presentation, so I don't want to forget that part. The question is about the recording system for cataloging photographs in the collection. What program do you use? Could you suggest this program or another similar one for researchers and graduate students working on photographs? And they're asking it, I think, personally for their own private use and only for study purposes, so that they're looking for something that's kind of user-friendly software.
So I just want to make sure I understand it correctly. That's to...
So there's a few questions in there.
Yeah.
We'll say, what program do you use? And then could you make a suggestion for a program for researchers or maybe graduate students or people who are kind of doing it for their own just kind of study purposes, maybe something that's simple or user-friendly?
Well, I number the files for like the images that I work off of based off of what's the accession numbers are. So I do that in the Capture One software. And then the only other system that I really use is the museum system. And that is definitely something that I think other people outside the museum can use, or is that just here? I can't remember, Lily.
It's like a collections management software system, so you can like purchase it, but it's, I think, very expensive.
Yeah.
But as far as the recording system goes for cataloging the photographs, I guess we'll say the recording for the, on your end, Mireya. Yeah. Jamie is commenting spreadsheets. Lightroom are probably affordable ways that you can kind of catalog things, and certainly I know that you can keyword and tag in those.
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend to start off with Lightroom. It's very, very user friendly, and as you were mentioning, Nick, you can have so many different ways to catalog images based off of attributes like star ratings, color coding them, adding your keywords for metadata, things like that. It's very easy to use, and the great thing about that is like you can't really mess anything up in that system. It's great for digital asset management, and so I would definitely recommend that. That's very, very it's available. I think it's based off of a subscription right now. So if you only needed Lightroom, I would definitely recommend that one.
And FileMaker Pro was also mentioned.
Okay, yeah, I've never used that one, but I've always used Lightroom and or Capture One.
Yeah.
And Capture One works very similarly with the same types of attributes, and you can add your metadata in there and search functions, and yeah, it's great. The thing about Capture One is the color is a lot better in Capture One than it is in Lightroom.
Okay. And then there was another question about if you could talk a little bit more about the Stophography card.
Yeah, so I'll pull that out because I have that right here. Cool. So this is the target that I was using for when I was using the Lightbox, and it's a grayscale target, and it's transparent. So basically this helps me still be able to determine like correct color because of the grayscale color values. So things are able to translate over, and it's the closest thing that we have that we can use because Golden Thread doesn't have anything like this yet.
All right. Here's a good question. How do you become a digitizing photographer? The question came from somebody from Mongolia, and they've never seen this kind of cataloging in their country.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your interest. So I definitely would recommend that you go through and you learn more of the technical side of photography, things like you want to learn your basics for sure. And I would definitely recommend learning lighting as well. That's a very important thing to learn about. And so I would recommend if you can volunteer somewhere where you can maybe apprentice and see how like somebody else is digitizing that work, and that way you can get your foot in the door and kind of see how that institution is working for that particular collection. I mean, there's different ways about it. I kind of went a very, very long way about it. I had to go to school for it, and then I made sure that I took an opportunity when an opportunity became available that they needed a photographer for digitizing a collection. And for me, I very much like working with objects a lot more than I do in portrait studios or things like that. But my interest has always been with objects and studios. So kind of combining the two, you can kind of just shadow somebody and really start getting an idea of what that looks like.
Yeah. This is awesome. This is like exactly what I want. Like there's a side conversation going on in the Zoom chat right now, which is like so cool. Like this is like, we can have that while this is going on. And this is like the beauty of this setup. So I'm really encouraged to see that. Let's see here. Mireya, what is a paper negative? Can you explain that?
I think probably Lily can explain that a little bit better.
All right. Lily.
Paper negative. Well, it's a negative made of paper. Usually it's like related to like a salted paper print. So you have your paper that is treated with the chemicals that you need to that are light sensitive. So it's just like a regular, 35 millimeter negative, but it's made of paper, and that's like what they had to use at the very beginning of photography if you weren't doing like things on metal like daguerreotypes or tintypes.
And was the paper transparent?
I think how it's very thin.
Yeah.
It's very thin, so it is kind of, you get that light through it.
Yeah, so you're able to create a negative, or you're able to create a positive. by contact printing.
Yeah. Yeah, so how you print from a paper negative is you would sandwich another treated piece of paper on top of it and expose that to light.
Yeah. Ooh, good question here. Mireya, do you ever make adjustments to the files, remove dust or things like that after capturing the images?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that because no, I don't. That's why I have this thing all the time with me. I because of FADGI, you cannot make any adjustments to the images in terms of like cloning things out. That's just not allowed.
Yeah. Lily, how exactly do you proceed to identify the anonymous subjects on photographs? How much time do you spend on average on a photograph for this part of the cataloging process?
It depends on the photograph. For something like Southern Haas, they are a very important group, and sometimes I took pictures of very important people, and this was in the 1850s, so, some of those people, it might be the only photograph of them, so it's important to identify them. So that one I would just spend quite a bit more time trying to identify. And with that, it's easy kind of starting with like who was famous in that time, or looking at what they're wearing, if there's any clues there. The Sitter's book is kind of useful. They're very big books, very long. But if it's like another one, just like a stereo view of some people like at a fair, I'm not going to really put any effort into identifying them.
Mireya, we're going to go back to you now. A question came in from another museum photographer. They're interested to know, do you use any cross polarization with the copy work? Also curious how you handle the daguerreotypes.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't use cross polarization, and sadly, I did not digitize the daguerreotypes that Lily is actually working on right now. That was done before Lily and I had actually come onto the project, and that was handled by our conservation lab. But what I did do was basically I just, made sure to change the file naming conventions so they're up to date with our standards now. So I did get to see them, just not in person. I know digitizing daguerreotypes is also a beast of a job. Can't make sure you have any reflection, so it requires covering up anything and everything. I mean, I even made a joke that you should cover up yourself in black velvet because you might have something on you that's reflecting onto the daguerreotype. But yeah, those are tricky to digitize.
I would say that this question is open to both of you. What was your process in terms of preparing the collection before it was digitized? And were there any items that were too fragile or damaged to be digitized?
Well, I mean, I think so far we have been able to digitize everything that has come through. For sure, the most fragile one that we're going to be dealing with is the pencil of nature. And that's why we've been taking a lot of time and steps to plan how we're going to handle it on Lily's end and then on my end. I mean, this is going to be a very completely different setup where I'm actually not going to be using any of the lighting setups that I talked about today. And at the same time, like, it's going to be very different because it's a very, very light sensitive object. So it just really changes how we have to approach the whole thing. But you'll get to see that in the video.
Oh, are you sharing a video today?
No, not today.
Oh, I was like, this is a surprise to me too. Okay.
Surprise, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, that's okay, but yeah. Let me see here. I think we've got time for just a couple. We've got time for a couple more questions. Lily, the tunnel bridge that you showed, is it still there? And have you ever gone back to see how it looks today?
I would love to go there. It's actually a hiking trail, so you can it's dry. The canal itself in that area is dry, so you can walk through the tunnel. but it closed, as I said, I think in the 1920s. It's still there. Go visit it.
Cool. How do you deal with orphan photographs?
I actually don't know what that is.
Not photographs of orphans, but I think photographs that are. I'll ask Paula, if you could expand on that in the Q&A, that would be great. And then we'll get back to that question, I promise. Let's see here. There's so many questions. I'm like trying to get to as many of them as we can. Why was finding the holes in the stereographic image exciting? And did you take the photo of the back of the image because of the holes or because of the writing on the back of that stereographic image?
Okay, so honestly, I had never ever dealt with French tissue stereo views before, so I was just excited that I was getting something that was very different from other objects. The fact that they were so tiny to me, I mean, like I look at the object before I even set it down on the copy stand and I couldn't see these. So when I was actually inspecting the image and I saw them, I knew that it also gave me something to look forward to once I transferred that over to the light box. So then I started thinking like, there's a reason for these pinholes, and I was very excited to see what that image was going to look like. I was actually also lent a stereo viewer. So while these were on the light box, I actually got to see how they were meant to be viewed. And that was something that I was just doing for me. But it's an object that's so different. And in terms of Boyer, there were only 21 of these in the collection. So that's not a whole lot compared to everything else that he has. So just being able to see like what it was that interested him also interests me. And I kind of wish there were more. We only have one of the Diablaries, and those are really interesting to see. And then I think there was another question about the Stereoviews. Nick?
Oh yeah. I'm trying to get back to that question. Why was finding the holes in the stereo image exciting? And did you take the photo of the back of the image because of the holes or because of the writing on the back of that stereograph?
So it's both. The writing is really important. Again, if it's Boyer's writing, it might be somebody else's writing, but also like when you have an object that is able to transmit light, you also want to see what's on the back of that object.
So I have an answer to Paula's question. Heather Shannon, who is one of our associate curators, commented in the chat that in regards to the orphan photographs, we have an inventory made around 1951 that helps us to identify works in the collection that are no longer associated with Boyer. I don't know if either of you want to elaborate on that or say anything in addition to that.
Yeah, things were numbered a little differently when the 1950s when it came in. So the inventory certainly helps a lot if that number is still on the object to reassociate them.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna get to one more question here. Oh boy. And I apologize that we can't get to everybody's questions. There's so many good ones. Where was that? All right. So, Mireya, can you talk about how you photograph bound book pages to ensure they stay flat without damaging the book? What tools do you use to hold them? Yeah.
So in those questions that I asked myself, like how far can this book open, really like the book itself is going to tell me like this is as far as I can go, and it is what it is. That's how I have to digitize it. So that might involve like if it's open enough, then I just photograph it that way. I capture it that way. And I want to make sure I get as much of the image, a pretty good clear view of the image. Sometimes maybe like it's gonna require some finagling, but in terms of like pages that also like to pop open, like they move back and forth, I have these little weighted snakes, or I have like these little acrylic blocks. And really it just depends on what's going to be best for the the object. If it's too fragile, I'm not going to use an acrylic block. If it's, I'm probably going to use a snake, and then I just drape that over the edge, not obstructing the image that's on the page at all.
And the weighted snake, what is that filled with? Like,
Um,
it's just like a weight, like a sand. It's not sand, but it's like a cloth material, and then so it's not, have hard edges or anything on the outside.
right, no hard edges. Think of like a shoelace, but it's a little bit heavier, and it's they're white, and they're pretty long. So depending on like the object, I mean, I can drape this thing all the way across, and usually what that's what I try to do. I try to make it very neat, so it's not something that's taken away from the image or the book.
Well, we are going to have to wrap things up now, and I do apologize to those of you whose questions we did not get to. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Lily and Mireya. Great presentation. Everyone is singing your praises in the chat and through the Q&A. You both did a great job, and appreciate you all for joining us. Like I said, this is being recorded, so we're gonna edit it. You'll see it in full, but we got to kind of get it edited for the web, and we'll have it up on YouTube hopefully by next Friday at the latest. And you should be getting an email, a follow-up email to this with a link to it once it goes live. So if you want to go back or share it with colleagues, friends, we definitely encourage you to do that. Thank you all for attending, and hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.